So, as we've said multiple times through these sets of notes for today, Pavlov and Watson were very much of a mindset that consciousness and our thought processes and our awareness of surroundings and things like that, those aren't fit for scientific study, okay? For behaviorists, it's all about observable behavior, and that's what the focus needs to be. The problem is Pavlov and Watson both seem to underestimate the significance of cognitive processes in the development of our associations of events and stimuli around us, as well as the biological constraints that influence our ability to learn things. And so it's very important as we extend our understanding of classical conditioning in these notes that we understand those two key points. Cognitive processes are involved, biological influences are as well. Okay, so let's take a look at both of those. First is going to be cognitive influences. Initially, earlier behaviorists like Watson, they argued that a lot of times behaviors can be kind of reduced down to mindless automatic processes. And that's what we mean when we say the mindless mechanisms aspect of this. Robert Rescorla, a psychologist, believed that in its most basic sense, this is correct. It is possible to develop, learned behaviors that occur just automatically and mindlessly. But for him, the idea is just a little too limited. There has to be some kind of cognitive process that's going on. And so what he establishes is the contingency model of classical conditioning. Contingency just means like an event or something that is likely to happen in the future. That's what that means. So that is essentially what he argues. A is contingent upon B. So one item or event depends on an association that has been made with another item or event. Okay, so A depends on B and vice versa. So in other words, the presence of your conditioned stimulus, which prior to that point was the neutral stimulus, has to predict the presence of the UCS. Otherwise, there's not going to be a classically conditioned response. Okay, so the presentation of one item in the classical conditioning breakdown of that neutral stimulus or the conditioned stimulus, it has to predict that the UCS will be there as well. Because if we don't have that there, then our development of learning doesn't occur. Okay? Learning happens in situations where, according to Rescorla, relationships between that CS and the UCS are clear and predictable. Okay, they're easy to follow. It's expected. And so as a result, that's what he argues is the contingency model of classical conditioning. Okay, we have to have some level of understanding of predictability between two things in order for that association to develop. So let's look at an example of this to kind of help us along on understanding it, because it can be a little confusing. For 3 straight days, let's say, whenever my phone rings during AP Psychology class, it is Mr. Brandt, and it's for you. Okay, he's calling you up to the office. So day 1, Mr. Brandt calls, can I see so-and-so? Day 2, Mr. Brandt calls, can I see so-and-so? Day 3, Mr. Brandt calls, can I see so-and-so? On day 4, that next day, when the phone rings in AP Psychology, more than likely what's going to happen is you're going to just automatically stand up, and you're going to walk out of the door and head to the hallway and then head up to the main office because you assume you've made that connection that the phone call, which is part A of this, is for you to go to Mr. Brandt's office, which is part B, okay? So going back to contingency model of A depends on B and vice versa. So the reasoning behind that is A, that phone call was contingent upon B, you being called to the office, because whenever A was presented, B happened. Hopefully that helps to make sense. But let's alter this just to give this a little bit more understanding, okay? Let's change the situation just a little bit. Let's say for a 3-day period, again, in AP Psychology class, the phone rings for those 3 days, but a different student is called to the counselor's office than to, let's say, the attendant's office. And then the last day, it's for Mr. Brandt. Okay, so let's say day 1, it's for Susie. She needs to go to the counselor's office. Second day, phone rings during AP Psych, and it's for Johnny. Johnny has to go to the attendant's office. Then day 3, The phone rings, it's Mr. Brandt, he wants to see you in his office. So on day 4 in AP Psychology, what are you assuming is going to happen? Are you going to stand up? Are you going to walk out? More than likely you're not, because you're not going to do anything. There hasn't been a strong connection made between that phone ringing and you being called to the office. A has not been contingent upon B. So one event didn't predict the other definitively for you. That prediction and that connection wasn't made, and so as a result, you were not classically conditioned to stand up and go. So it's very important then, as we're going through this, our reactions are not just knee-jerk reactions, okay? We don't do things mindlessly necessarily. It has to be based on our expectations of what will happen. And if that's the case, then there has to be some kind of cognitive process, some kind of mental mapping that's occurring in our brains as we're going through that learning process in order for this to occur, okay? So according to Rescorla then, it's not just some kind of mindless occurrence that happens. One other kind of cognitive influence to look at, even though it's not necessarily classical conditioning, is insight learning. Insight learning is very beneficial because it shows us that learning in and of itself isn't just a mindless function, but it includes cognitive functions and developments that have occurred along the way of your development, okay? So, insight learning is going to be introduced to us through the studies of Wolfgang Kohler. And it's a form of cognitive learning where problem solving ends up happening because we kind of reorganize our perceptions in that moment. So perceptions, these are things we've developed over a period of time and through various different experiences of things. And so basically what happens is insight is kind of this like light bulb moment that happens when you are trying to solve a problem. So Kohler is going to discover this because of his work with chimps, particularly with one chimp named Sultan, because he found that chimps would solve pretty complex problems to try to get their food source of a banana by going about and combining these simpler behaviors that they had learned previously and combining them to get to that end result, which was reaching their banana. Because what Sultan did was, in various different scenarios at different times, in order to obtain his banana, that was dangling from all different kinds of places, ceilings, construction equipment, you name it. Sultan had learned to step on pile boxes up, step up on it, and grab a banana. In another scenario, he learned to use a stick or combine sticks to make them very long to be able to kind of knock that banana down. But when Kohler hung the bananas even higher in certain scenarios, what Sultan did was he combined those two experiences to solve this complex issue of being able to get much higher to reach his banana. And you can see that here in these pictures. This is Sultan. In this initial stage, here he is putting boxes up and trying to grab his banana while the other chimps watch him. In this scenario, he starts trying to put sticks together so that way he can kind of make it longer to be able to whack it down. And then you see in this final scenario right here, he used both. He took the boxes and piled those up, and that still wasn't tall enough for him, so then he grabbed his stick and he started to try to whack at it to get it to him that way. Okay, so that is insight learning. All right, so let's wrap this up with a discussion on biological influences. Within psychology, we truly do believe that animals and humans are biologically wired to make certain connections much more easily than others. And the underlying reason for this is because those connections have helped us to survive. It's an evolutionary process and an issue in that scenario. And John Garcia, as I alluded to earlier, is going to be the one that really takes a look at this biological influence with us developing classically conditioned associations. And he looked at nauseated rats. What he did was he gave these rats a particular taste or sight or sound, and that's going to be the conditioned stimulus. And later, what he did was he gave them radiation or drugs, the unconditioned stimulus, that would lead to nausea and vomiting. Okay, so those were then the unconditioned responses of getting sick to your stomach and throwing up. And I know that it's really kind of hard to hear this because it sounds kind of cruel to do that to these rats, but you've got to think back to the ethical standards of research. animal research is permitted to occur if they truly do believe that all of humankind will benefit from the research that is being done. Now, the results of Garcia's nausea in rats experiment is that organisms are predisposed to learn associations that help them adapt and survive. So those rats, they didn't necessarily eat those foods anymore because they knew that they would get sick as a result. So we believe that only learned aversion to taste show. So, the results of John Garcia's research on the rats is that they only learned aversion to the taste portion of the experiment, not the sights or the sounds. And so, as a result of that, we believe that organisms are predisposed through evolutionary processes of survival to learn associations that help them to adapt and survive. So they believe that actually taste aversion is an evolutionary process that our ancestors, if they ate something bad and they got sick from it, it was our body's way of saying, hey, this is not going to let you survive. You might put yourself in serious harm if you continue to eat this thing. And so that's why taste aversion ended up developing, interestingly enough. So this was our ending to the extension of classical conditioning notes. And the next thing we will end up covering together is operant conditioning. Let me know if you got any questions.